Houdini 19 is packed with new stuff. Let's dive in and check one out.
Volume noises. In Houdini 19, we now have the ability to add noises directly to volumes and VDBs. This is awesome and gives us a lot of flexibility. There are 3 nodes and each has a different use case. Let's take a look at them. Volume noise fog. One of the ways that I love using the fog noise is to break up a pyro source. I find this yields a much more interesting pyro simulation. So here I have a basic setup with a sphere, a pyro source set to initialize smoke from the dropdown. I then use a volume rasterize attribute to convert the point attributes into VDBs. Now I have a fog VDB with a constant value. I can use a volume noise fog. By default, it's set to work on density, which is perfect. I want to change the operation to multiply instead of add, as I don't want to add to my density, but rather keep the ranges between 0 and 1. Now we can use the enable remap ramp and clamp these values. The reason we aren't seeing anything is because at the moment we're seeing both density and temperature. So we can plug this into our pyro solver and view that, or we can remove the temperature from the volume rasterize attributes while we're setting up the density. The other thing we can do is set it to be an animated noise. Now you can see that we get this really cool looking source. We can now duplicate this node and do the same thing for temperature after we add the attribute back into our volume rasterize attributes. When you compare the smoke sim with and without the noise, you can see that we get a much more interesting result when we add some noise in. You can also use this to manipulate existing fog VDBs, such as those created with the cloud tools. Now you can cut out sections or even set it to minimum and get some really nice looking results. Of course, there are many different noise types and each has its own cool look. If you look at the help page, you'll see this awesome image showing the different noise types. Changing noise types gets you some fun results. Obviously, you can noise up shapes and throw them at your favorite solvers because who doesn't love a squishy pig head? While we're working with fogs, it's worth mentioning that there's also a new node in Houdini 19, Volume Adjust Fog, which lets you make further awesome manipulation to your fog volume with all the cool adjustments in the node. Have a look at the Attribute Adjust Color video in this series where I go over all the parameters. The Volume Adjust Fog has similar set of parameters. The next node in this pack is Volume Noise SDF. This lets us add noises directly on SDF volumes. An SDF volume is created when you use a VDB from polygons. So now we can apply noises quickly and easily to these SDFs. Something to be aware of is that the volume noise is displacing values, not adding them. We won't get into the ins and outs of this, but it is something to be aware of. Another useful feature in these nodes is the blend mode using a volume mask. Let's take a look at how we can set this up. So in this scene, I have a pig head that I'm subdividing to smooth it out. I'm then going to create a VDB from polygons. Let's turn down the voxel size, thus increasing our resolution. Let's drop down a volume noise SDF. Let's dial in some noise. I'm going to change my noise to be positive. I'll also use Manhattan Cellular F2 to F1. I'll increase the amplitude. Then to make it a little more dramatic, I'll use a remap ramp and clamp my values. Now in order for us to get the blend mask working, we need to set up a mask. There are multiple ways to do this. Let's try one of those ways. Let's start with a box. This is going to be our mask, so let's resize it to be in the position that we want to mask off. Then we'll create another VDB from polygons. This time we'll use fog VDB and we'll label it as mask. Now we can merge both VDB from polygons. We can plug them into the volume noise and check on blend and then change constant to use volume. Now you can see that we get just the section within our box being displaced by our noise. After the noise, we can use a delete node and use the drop down to select our mask so it's no longer in our way. The other way to create masks is on your incoming geometry. So let's create an attribute noise on our pig head. We'll change this to be a float and we're going to name it mask. Let's set a value and just adjust the settings so we get something that looks like this. Now in our VDB from polygons, we're going to increase our exterior band voxels as we need these voxels for our mask to work properly and not to cut our noise off. Now in the surface attributes, let's create one and choose our mask. And in the VDB name, let's label it as mask. Now when we plug this into the volume noise SDF, it'll use this as the mask. Notice if I turn the exterior band voxels back down to 3, we lose our noise. This is because the mask is working on the thickness of the fog volume, and because our mask VDB is so thin, anything outside of this is cut off. So adding more voxels gives us the result we want. Again, there are so many cool noise types. Trying out different noise types can lead to some really great discoveries. You can also change the displacement method and it'll yield some weird and cool results. It's definitely worth playing with different noises to see what results you can find. There is also an animation tab which lets you super easily add in movement to your noises. This gets some awesome looking movement and can be used in a variety of ways. You can also duplicate and invert noises to fill in the gaps and get the swirly interaction. The last node is the volume noise vector. This lets you generate a noise in a vector volume or VDB. I find this very useful when doing volume advection. This adds some really easy to use noise parameters. In this scene, I have a subdivided sphere, I'm using an attribute adjust color to give it some color, and then I'm plugging it into a pop network. Then I'm going to use a volume velocity from surface. This node generates a velocity based on the incoming surface. By default, it needs a divergent attribute. So I'll use an attribute create and create a divergent attribute set to 1. I'll lower the voxel size and leave the rest at default. If I use a volume trail, I can see what this gives me. Now I can introduce the volume noise vector, set it to work on the same val field, and I can now play with the values. In this scene, I set the value and I used a Perlin flow noise. Inside my popnet, I'm using a pop advect by volume so I can use this noise field to advect my particles. Now I get this really nice swirling behavior. You can also use this to break up an existing velocity field. So here I have the same scene I had before, except in my volume velocity from surface, I added a gas turbulence to give it a curl noise. But when you hit play, this is a little uniform as you can see here. So let's break it up a little with a volume noise vector. You can adjust the settings while visualizing it with the volume trail. Now we get the same swirly trails, but with a nice hint of breakup. This just adds just a little bit of randomness. You can use this to manipulate any velocity field, giving some fun results and endless possibilities. I hope you can see how amazing these nodes are and how much faster they make working with noises when dealing with volumes and VDBs. It's time to open Houdini, dive inside and play with some noises. I'm excited to see what you make.